We will be picking up on Chapter 4 of Trance, Formation of America, the true life story of a CIA mind control slave by Kathy O'Brien with Mark Phillips. Truth and consequences, just us pursued and justice denied. That's the chapter. Our much anticipated arrival into the Seattle-Washington International Airport terminal heralded a new beginning. Kathy appeared to be openly optimistic that perhaps at long last, Kelly would soon have her chance for recovery. Privately, I felt much less hopeful. I knew from past personal experiences and through my insider sources that mental health physicians from the private sector of society have little acquaintance with secret U.S. government mind control research. The only mind control information these doctors had access to, for the most part, was the hysterical comments supplied by their troubled patients. Hysteria, in this case, as a symptom of misinformation, is highly contagious, and therefore spread throughout the mental health profession. Many practitioners displayed symptoms of the ostrich syndrome to me, their peers and patients, through fear and chronic denial. It was 1990, the beginning of the last decade of this century, and the millennium, and most mental health physicians remained in a state of denial concerning the existence of mind control. Mental health as a science is barely 100 years of age, truly an industry in its infancy in relation to the other recognized healing arts. Due to the mental health's infancy and fact that it is rooted in archaic mystical theories of Jung and Freud, combined with the non-availability of government-controlled research information, the term mental health is viewed by patients and doctors as an oxymoron. Patients I have interviewed who suffer from dissociative disorders frequently refer to the profession as mental hell, and their well-intentioned provider is as the rapist. Unfortunately, for all parties concerned in many reported instances, these cruel labels are consistent with the quality of the care provided, whereas I strongly support in concept the healing arts existing in the fields of mental health that could be applied in treatment of mind control patients. I cannot foresee their application in meeting and needs of these patients without some radical changes in our National Security Act. Around 1970, I recall witnessing a mild case in point. I was overseeing the videotaping of a top-secret psychiatric experiment involving a young man who had suffered brain damage resulting from some type of severe head trauma. This patient was ambulatory. He could not remember anything, express himself, or for that matter, think. He was not brain dead. He was mind dead. Through the application of a combination of experimental drugs and high-tech electronic technology involving harmonics, his brain was being retrained to permit constructed thought processes to commence. The brain scar tissue was inhibiting his ability to think, Man, this text is so small. I gotta start over. The brain scar tissue that was inhibiting his ability to think was being chemically and electronically bypassed. I equated this experimental procedure to the hot wiring of an ignition switch of an automobile to preclude the use of a key. The extraordinary procedure and subsequent results of this experimental therapy was meticulously recorded. The record tape and doctor notes were dropped into a security envelope and were taken by courier to Fort George Meade, Maryland. What made this case so memorable was the event that immediately followed. I overheard the experiment's attending physician complaining bitterly to his nurse colleague that his patient is an adjourning ward who was not a DoD guinea pig, through application of this method, could probably recover. I gotta read that over again. I must have fucked up. I overheard the experiment's attending physician that immediately followed. I overheard the experiment's attending physician complaining bitterly to his nurse colleague that his patient is in an adjourning ward who was not a DoD guinea pig, through application of this method, could probably recover. The doctor's complaint addressed his being prohibited from applying state-of-the-art treatment for his patient by virtue of his DoD oath of secrecy. This doctor was frustrated at being forced to serve two masters. The Department of Defense, or DoD, being one master, held control over his career through his medical license, liability insurance, and the secrecy oath he had signed. The second master was his doctor's own moral and ethical standards, supported by the Hippocratic oath that had signed upon becoming a physician. Funny how the Hippocratic oath is just spelt exactly the same as being a hypocrite. Thus, without benefit, the voluminous DoD research findings and technology developments, the medical field of mental health is in its learning curve for establishing models to provide patients state-of-the-art care. The other words mental health provides themselves are quickly becoming the second group of mind information control victims. The mental health profession is in a state of crisis and has arrived at the proverbial crossroads of failure and success. The road to success through the application of available technologies appears to be blocked for reasons of national security. As a direct result of DoD management of mind research secrets and the resulting federal information containment practices, mental health providers are on the defensive with their patients, the courts, and more recently with certain special interest groups. These groups are attacking the mental health professional as a target for destruction. Well-funded organizations with very questionable agendas, such as False Memory Foundation, FMF, and the Church of Scientology, have publicly denounced mental health as a profession. The church... Goddamn. Forgive me. Well-funded organizations with very questionable agendas, such as the False Memory Foundation and the Church of Scientology, have publicly denounced mental health as a profession. The Church of Scientology has emerged as the apparent leader in publicly denouncing the mental health profession. Through the church's Washington, D.C.-based human rights lobby group, it has launched a massive negative propaganda campaign accompanied by numerous lawsuits against ethical drug companies and mental health providers. Scientologists believe their church's founder, L. Ron Hubbard, has discovered a cure-all for mental illness through behavior modification. Hubbard, a successful science fiction writer, allegedly acquired knowledge of subliminal mind control through his military service with U.S. Navy intelligence. He named his behavioral modification program Dianetics after his first wife, Diane. The False Memory Foundation is a lobby group which is primarily utilized by persons charged with sexual abuse. The FMF is desperately attempting to develop legislation that restricts therapy for persons suffering from dissociative disorders as a result of trauma. This organization's stated beliefs include that repressed memory is a myth. FMF, or False Memory Foundation, has found the mental health profession's Achilles heel. To date, the model for developing an effective therapy regime for dissociative disorders, which are as a result of repeated trauma, has not been published by either the American Psychiatric Association or the American Psychological Association. The difficulty in developing a model is due to a number of factors. The primary factor involves national security secrets concerning classified mind control research. It's actually snowing right now. What strange times. In the present climate, referring mind control victims to mental health professionals for treatment would be tantamount to subjecting a patient needing delicate surgery to a surgeon who was blindfolded and handcuffed. The knowledge of these conditions produced the private opinion I withheld from Kathy when she professed optimism for Kelly's latest recovery opportunity. Nevertheless, Kathy was nearing completed recovery, and we both recognized we were all doing what we could at the moment to provide for Kelly's needs. Perhaps identifying who within our government is interested in withholding vital medical research findings and technologies information from the mental health profession could provide a foundation of understanding. From my personal experiences while working for Capital International Airways, CIA, I formed a strong opinion that addresses this question. However, the answer that mirrors my perception was later eloquently provided by a Washington, D.C. news correspondent and journalist Linda Hunt in her book Secret Agenda. The historical basis for this book are the declassified DoD documents identifying Project Paperclip as being the secret important relocation of Nazi and fascist scientists into the United States over a 40-year period. The brilliant criminal scientists were primarily focused on two areas of research: rockets and the mind. They were placed in positions of authority in, among others, prestigious universities, colleges, industries, and NASA. Over the years, these imported criminals have directly influenced our society with advanced rocket technologies and mind control applications through United States government-sponsored research. According to Secret Agenda, Nazism as a philosophy and form of government is alive and destroying our country, in part as a result of Project Paperclip. I can attest to this statement from my personal knowledge gained during my employment at Capital International Airways, CIA, which is named as one of the primary transporters of Project Paperclip. These were background facts of some of the thoughts that rushed my mind on our long drive from Seattle to the southern eastern U.S. I was anxious to discover the end result of my telephone campaign in the pursuit of justice I had waged while in Alaska. Our first destination would be Huntsville, Alabama. This southern United States city is famous for its tourism centerpiece, the NASA-owned U.S. Space and Rocket Center. The town also boasts of being home to more Pentagon black budget U.S. dollars per capita than any place in America. Huntsville, Alabama. I gotta remember that. Excuse me, I gotta find. The text is so small here. My goodness. Here we are. Kathy harbors a very different opinion of this town, its police force, and the NASA research facility. For Kathy and Kelly, Huntsville had been a place they were regularly taken by Alex Houston for high-tech torture and the production of child and adult pornography films. The trip to Huntsville would be different for Kathy. This trip to Huntsville would be different for Kathy, except for one aspect of her previous experiences. Both she and I would receive our first threat to our lives in our pursuit of justice from law enforcement. This was surprising to me and normal for Kathy. The lead up to this threat began with my phone call to Huntsville-based legal aid group known as the National Association of Child Advocates. This organization publicized that it was formed through the leadership efforts of the local district attorney Bud Kramer, who is known to his constituents as Gun Ban Bud. After supplying this advocacy center with Kelly's recollections of her past experiences in Huntsville, we were contacted by 2 Huntsville Police Department vice detectives. Their names were Jeff Bennett and Chuck Crabtree. Upon our arrival into Huntsville, these 2 vice cops escorted us to our trailer to a local apartment used for staging drug buys. The place was furnished complete with audio and video bugs throughout every room. When I asked Bennett if the place was rigged, he flatly denied it. From this lie, I knew with certainty that Kathy and I were there to be specimens for whomever to study. I knew who, and we gave them our best performance to mislead them. This action probably saved our lives. After weeks of delays, the 2 cops sat down with Kathy and me for discussion. She supplied them a myriad of testimony, including detailed physical descriptions of 2 particular perpetrators, their names and location maps of where they lived, and allegedly produced child and adult pornography. The 2 perpetrators themselves, Huntsville policemen, were also helpful assets in the campaign for electing District Attorney Bud Kramer. Their names were Audie Majors and Sergeant Frank Crowell. After Kathy exhausted all of her recollections, Crabtree and Bennett ordered us to leave Huntsville now, while we were still alive, and shut up if we intended to stay that way. Later, Kathy and I would learn that Crabtree and Bennett had notified every law enforcement officer in over 5 states to whom we had provided information. They reported that we were a pair of professional con artist criminals. Perhaps they were able to accomplish this discrediting tactic as a result of police reports we filed in other states, which included a reference to our bad experience with the Huntsville Police Department. In addition, the Nashville office of the FBI was responsible for perpetrating Crabtree's and Bennett's discrediting lies. The FBI action ceased after resident agent in charge Ben Purser was told by a friendly district attorney that I now could prove the identity and prosecute those responsible for the character assassination. The harassment stopped. It is interesting to note that Bud Kramer would, in less than a year, be elected to Congress. Within months after his election, Bud was rewarded for years of alleged containment practices. Allegedly, Bud has been covering up investigations for the intelligence community, DOD, and of course his #1 financial supporter, NASA. Bunch of pedophiles. The wife of Atlanta, Georgia physician Miss Faye Yeager did, however, survive Bud's wrath in court. Her crime was advocating for her protecting a child who had been horribly abused. This courageous lady had her day in court and won. She has filed a countersuit in federal court, reeling from learn reeling from Bud's secondhand threats to our lives. We returned to Nashville. Here we learned that Kentucky VIP Hospital Administration had suddenly declared Kelly's state of Alaska medical records to be in error. VIP said she was fine. This statement was supplemented by, "You best come here now and pick her up, or we'll give her to Kentucky Child Services, and they will find adoptive parents." This was a terrifying development, since Kelly could not function outside a restrictive environment. She had been declared suicidal and homicidal by 3 attending physicians and/or therapists. Kathy and I were homeless. We brought Kelly back to Tennessee, where Kathy and I stayed in my mother's tiny 2-bedroom home. This living arrangement would not last. Kelly's asthma program, destined to separate her from her mother, returned within 48 hours. We rushed her, gasping for breath, to Vanderbilt Hospital in Nashville for emergency treatment. Again, Kelly's condition worsened to the extremely critical point, then returned to normal. Her attending doctor thought he had seen a real miracle until he learned about mind control. Vanderbilt Hospital physicians who reviewed Kelly's past medical and psychiatric records recommended that she be moved to the worst child warehouse we've seen so far. Crockett Cumberland House. Figures coming from a Vanderbilt establishment. Anderson Cooper. The home for broken butterflies. Oh, God. Anybody knows that butterflies is a symbol for MK Ultra, mind control testing, for women. Because Kathy and I were both unemployed, and Kelly only had Medicaid insurance, the state of Tennessee demanded temporary custody. Their demands for custody were legally legitimate and morally equated to extortion, for they had no intentions for seeking expert therapy for Kelly. Through a lengthy 2-year court proceeding, with 5 lawyers opposing Kathy, we had a partial victory. Kelly was transferred to Charter Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, where, again, she did not receive multiple personality syndrome / dissociative identity syndrome, or MPD or DID therapy, but for the first time did receive genuine empathy from a social worker, Abbott Jordan. During this period, my life and liberty was threatened by the Nashville Metro Police Department. This verbal death threat was delivered by Metro Homicide Captain Mickey Miller and echoed by his friend and subordinate, Lieutenant Tommy Jacobs. Miller said, "You best forget this woman. Walk away from all this now before your health changes," Jacobs said. "There's nothing wrong with that kid that her father, Cox, can't fix. She just has allergies. You best forget you ever heard of either one of them. I have all this conversation on audio tape." Within a few months of these threats came others threatening both our lives and liberty from every branch of law enforcement within the state of Tennessee. This included the Nashville office of the FBI. The latter was in the form of clerical mistake on the part of the FBI was to be a frame-up for my supposedly threatening the President of the United States, George Bush. This charge was totally groundless and was subsequently dropped, but only after I secured a lawyer. It was now 1991, and Kathy and I had determined that we must proceed with Phase 2 of our pursuit of justice through a well-organized information dissemination campaign. The funding for this project would indirectly come from the assistance of Bill Ross, who also provided constant moral support. Kathy and I have always felt uncomfortable exposing gentle persons like Bill Ross to such horrific information as pertains to trauma-based mind control. However, we have learned over the years through our public speaking engagements and consultations with physicians and others that, generally speaking, people appreciate knowing why they are no longer at the top of the food chain. Bill Ross, like hundreds of others, never gave up hope that we would live to tell our story. 5 years have passed since we returned from Alaska. The lessons learned through this trailblazing effort in our pursuit of justice should never be taught to anyone. No person should have to experience the heartache, desperation, and grinding poverty that Kelly, Kathy, and I have had to live with. During the winding down portion of our information dissemination campaign, Kathy approached me with an idea she thought could help us win public support. She had repeatedly commented that she wanted to rescue Sedina Dina Reed's daughter, of actor-singer Jerry Reed of Smokey and the Bandit fame. According to Kathy, she had been used repeatedly in pornography productions with Sedina over the years and had bonded with this once beautiful woman. Sedina's husband, David Roderick, a.k.a. Dave Rowe, was then her alleged sadistic handler. It is noteworthy that Rowe allegedly received his training on how to maintain a slave using specific tortures from Alex Houston. Rowe lived and reportedly loved with Houston before he met Sedina. Kathy and I naively believed at the time that Jerry Reed was not involved in his daughter's enslavement, as was Kathy's father. Furthermore, we were convinced that Jerry Reed, with his numerous connections into politics and the entertainment industry, could be a powerful ally. This was not to be. I rescued Sedina, and in the minutes after the rescue, she began talking, but not until I had discussed my plan in person with her famous father and his agent at a Brentwood, Tennessee restaurant. Reed had more than enough time to warn Rowe that I was Army and on my way to his house. All evidences disappeared. Years later, a U.S. Customs Enforcement officer informed me that I had somebody connected to Reed, possibly Reed himself, suggesting I might be blackmailing him. This clean customs officer knew I had rescued Sedina from Rowe's enslavement, and that I had audio-taped all meetings with Sedina, Jerry Reed, and his wife Prissy. He was openly concerned for my safety and that Reed was lying so as to frighten me away. Within 2 months after the rescue, Sedina and her mother filed criminal charges, including sexual child abuse of Sedina's 4-year-old son, against Rowe. A spook informant working with the Nashville District Attorney's Office alerted me to these charges and the anticipated outcome. No action was taken for reasons of national security. Sedina has been prostituted to, among many others, heads of state and to the Arabian ambassador, to the U.S. Prince Bandar bin Sultan. According to non-involved witnesses of one of her encounters with Bandar, friend of George Bush's, she was one of his favorite slaves. We never heard from Sedina or any member of her family since the rescue. This trek through hell in our pursuit of justice taught nothing to Kathy that she had not already been told by her abusers. For me, I learned the hard way that our Constitution was only a beautiful plan that had been stolen, plundered, and replaced for reasons of national security. Today, Kathy and Kelly, I, and all true patriots stand at the proverbial crossroads of revolution or evolution. Through armed revolution, we patriots will perish, and the emergence of a totally government controlled society will herald in another period of dark ages. As a proud gun owner armed with inside knowledge, I know we are technologically outgunned. Whereas if we choose to evolve through the changes to our psyche that developed communication technologies present, we can reinstate our Constitution and set our people free. Revolution or evolution, change in life as we know it is inevitable. Each of us now must take a stand to commit a portion of our individual time and diminishing resources to support the action groups and individuals who are not afraid to work at taking back our government through mass exposure of its crimes. We must seek new leaders who will be committed to doing the most with the least. These leaders share the battle cry that silence does indeed equal death. And that's the... Oh, here's our snake in the grass. Alex Houston. Here's a lot of Mark Phillips' business cards from when he was working with Capital International Airways. Something from the U.S. Department of Justice stating Mark's name. What does the letter say? Dear Mr. Phillips, this letter will advise you of the following matters pertaining to your testimony before the federal grand jury for which you have been subpoenaed. Number 1, you are a possible subject of an investigation by the federal grand jury. This means that the United States Attorney's Office or the grand jury has substantial evidence linking you to the commission of a crime, and you are, in the judgment of the United States Attorney's Office, a possible defendant. Number 2, the grand jury is conducting an investigation of possible violations of federal laws, including Title 18 U.S.C. Section 871, mailing, threatening communications. Number 3, you may refuse to answer any questions if a truthful answer to the question would tend to incriminate you. Anything you do or say may be used against you by the grand jury or in a subsequent legal proceeding. You are entitled to consult with counsel about this matter. If you cannot afford to hire an attorney, one will be appointed for you upon request of the court. To the court. If you have retained counsel or have been appointed counsel, the grand jury will permit you a reasonable opportunity to step outside the grand jury room to consult with counsel before answering questions, if you so desire. September 9th, 1991. More of his court stuff he went through. And here... I'll leave the top as Kathy. Top 2 photos, Mark with pet raccoons, 1988. 1988 photo of Mark, Kathy, and Kelly. Kathy and Mark, 1988, Las Vegas, Nevada. Kathy was pretty. More More pictures. I don't think I have to read them all. You guys can check them out. Pediatric Consultants of Alaska, Incorporated, June 22nd, 1989. Dear Mr. Chapman, Kelly O'Brien appeared in my office in the company of her mother, Kathy O'Brien, on 6/12/89. Mother requested evaluation for possible sexual abuse. Child appeared somewhat ill at ease but was fully cooperative and had a good sense of humor, joking during the examination. Physical examination. Heat. She was a rather round-faced child with prominent cheeks, otherwise negative. Breasts. Breasts are tenor stage O development. Chest. Fine musical wheezes throughout. GU. The genital exam is tenor stage O development. The introitus is intensely red with a moderate white discharge. Culture for sexually transmitted diseases was negative. The hymen has a smooth, thick edge with a 6 by 8 millimeter opening. The vaginal mucosa appeared normal. Rectal anus has no tears, no fissures, and no scars. Extremities are rather stocky in the proximal portion. Diagnosis: large opening in the hymen, indicative of sexual penetration. Nonspecific vaginitis of childhood, chronic asthma. Comment: vaginitis causes some swelling of the hymen tissue. If the swelling was not present, the opening through the hymen may appear considerably larger. The size of the opening itself is typical for a child who has been sexually penetrated with an object the size of an adult finger. This could not have been caused by an accident because the hymen is recessed back into the introitus far enough to protect it from damage occurring from falls, splits, etc. Clinton B. Lillibridge, medical doctor. Show me the facts. Well, here they are. Pediatric Council of Alaska, Incorporated, September 11th, 1989. Dion Roberts, medical doctor. Anchorage, Alaska. Dear Dion, Kelly Cox is 9 and a half-year-old chronic asthma that was involved with her. Kelly Cox is a 9 and 1/2-year-old chronic asthma that was involved with her parent in a cult which did mind programming. Mother and Kelly are now in rather intensive treatment for this with salutary effect. SALUTARY. She had physical findings of chronic asthma. They have applied for Social Security disability, which requires evaluation of expertise beyond mine. A copy of the paperwork is enclosed. Charter North Hospital. Cox, O'Brien, Kelly. Discharge. This looks like some... Cat! The patient is a 4-year-old girl who was admitted to the hospital on transferring from Humana Hospital, where she has been a patient for approximately 2 weeks. She was admitted there because of an acute asthmatic episode in which she had deteriorated from a previous time. Additionally, the patient is a victim of sexual abuse and ritualizing abuse involving hypnosis, mind control, and psychological programming. The patient has been under the hypnotic control of her stepfather from the age of 2.5 until approximately 6 months prior to admission. During this time, the patient had been sexually abused and participated in ritual abuse and had been programmed to die. Last June, at the end of the school year, the patient had an acute asthmatic episode requiring intensive treatment at Humana Hospital. During that time, she was on steroids and has been recently on a course of steroids. This patient is admitted to Charter North Hospital because of suicidal/homicidal ideation. The ideation appears to be most directed towards herself, her mother, and her stepfather. The patient's mental status examination at the time of admission indicates an attractive blonde-haired girl with a slightly moon-faced shaped faces consistent with the use of steroids. She relates easily to the examiner, whom she knows through her outpatient treatment. She is animated and engaging. She is quite resistant to exploration of her problems, but can fairly easily refer to the sexual abuse she has experienced. There are no bizarre or unusual behaviors noted in this examination tonight. She does seem somewhat agitated and admits that she is apprehensive. She appears to be intellectually bright. Admitting diagnosis, dissociative disorder, OS, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and bronchial asthma. Social history was obtained by the unit social worker. It is his assessment that she is an engaging and verbal youngster on a superficial social level. The writer was able to trigger the patient's defenses, which consisted of a hoarse persona and withdrawal. Activity level was good and eye contact appropriate. Certificate of live birth, I guess. There's more stuff. The White House, November 20th, 1990. Dear Congressman Clement, thank you for your recent letter enclosing correspondence you received from Mark Phillips of Nashville, Tennessee. We appreciate your interest in sharing Mr. Phillips' letter with us. I have taken the liberty of forwarding a copy of your correspondence to the appropriate officials for further attention. Thank you again for your interest in writing. Best regards, Frederick McClure, Honorable. Must have been part of the story of what was written. Dear Mr. Phillips, Bob Clement has sent us the copies and received your November 15th, 1990 letters to President Bush and Attorney General Thornburg. While we have not received your original letter, we are forwarding these copies to officials at the Department of Justice for appropriate consideration. With best wishes, Shirley M. Brien. Congress of the United States House of Representatives, Mark Phillips. Dear Mr. Phillips, as you requested, I have forwarded the President and Attorney General Thornburg the packages you delivered to my office. I should receive a response. I will be pleased to share it with you. In the meantime, please feel free to call me if I can be of further assistance. Thank you for bringing this matter to my attention. This is all just confirming his quote-unquote story. But he's just the correspondence of the congressman he contacted. And I mean, it goes on. All the attorneys. Photocopying their business cards. This book was the only thing that really kept them alive. They created this book and sent it to every top official so that if anything did happen to them, the story would basically be true and would be further investigated. And this book saved their lives, in a way. And gets the story out to all the people that need to hear it. Federal agents. All the names and people that were brought up during the first little reading. Good Lord. Here's what the article says. Kramer on top secret panel. Washington, D.C. Bud Kramer, D. Huntsville, has been on the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence for over a year now, but there's not much to say about it. Or rather use the old joke, he could tell you about it, but he'd have to kill you. It's a remarkable committee, Kramer. This is way too hard to read. And part 2. This will be written by Kathy O'Brien. An open letter. Mind control is absolute. Under MK Ultra Project Monarch, that's where the butterflies come in, trauma-based mind control, I lost control over my own free will thoughts. I could not think to question, reason, or consciously comprehend. I could only do exactly what I was driven to do. Those who controlled my mind, and ultimately my actions, claimed to be alien. Those who controlled my mind, and ultimately my actions, claimed to be aliens, demons, and gods. But it was my experience that these perpetrators of the New World Order controls were/are bound by earthly human confines, despite their terror tactic claims and illusions. The same laws of nature and the same laws of man do indeed apply to them. While they manipulated me by my religion, my maternal instincts, and my genuine concern for humanity, they never possessed my innate being. They could not make me one of them. They never took into consideration the strength of the human spirit. They did not even know it existed. Ask why. And we will pick this up. Dedication. Book is dedicated to Kelly in order that she is understood and granted her right to qualified rehabilitation for MK Ultra Project Monarch mind control abuses she endured at the hands of our country's so-called leaders. Book is dedicated as am I to Mark Phillips for rescuing Kelly and me from our mind control existence and clearing the way to recovery for Kelly by lovingly assisting me in restoration of my mind and ultimately my free will. Acknowledgements. A special thanks to these unseen whose presence have been evident, and a special thanks to those unsung. You know who you are. And we'll pick this up tomorrow.